and welcome to Haemcast. I'm Kathryn Jenner. This is the first episode in a special family-focused Haemcast series in collaboration with Local Families with Bleeding Disorders, a charitable organisation that offers support and understanding about what it's like to live with a bleeding disorder or to have a child who has one. Bleeding disorders like haemophilia and von Willebrand disease have wide-ranging impacts on health, care and family life. Over the course of the series with Local Families, we'll explore different aspects of family life with a bleeding disorder, but we're starting off with something a bit special. A few months ago, Rich Gorman, Assistant Professor in Ethics and Social Science at Brighton Medical School, worked with award-winning poet and arts practitioner Dawn Gorman, no relation, to host a series of online poetry workshops. They worked with a small group from Local Families with Bleeding Disorders, encouraging them to use poetry to express their hopes, expectations and worries about the bleeding disorders that impact their families. Dr. Khair and I got together with Rich, Dawn and some of the poetry group to find out more about it. Here's Rich.
A lot of my work and research involves working creatively with patient groups and people affected by rare conditions and trying to find a way to give people more of a voice and a platform to talk about the non-clinical aspects of health and healthcare and the things that really matter to people in their own lives and how they experience health and healthcare. In a previous project with funding from the Wellcome Trust, my colleague and I, Professor Bobby Farsidis, worked in a variety of creative ways to explore families' experiences of rare disease. And one of the ways that we worked was using poetry. And we were very sort of lucky to connect with Dawn Gorman, a wonderful poet and poetry facilitator, and worked with our families and participants at the time to produce a book called Helix of Love, which did wonderfully and really resonated with lots of families, lots of healthcare professionals, and really gave a focus to some of the experiences that often get left out of more clinical narratives about life with rare disease. Now, having a bleeding disorder myself, I was really keen to sort of take what we'd learned from that project and bring it to the bleeding disorders community and really shine a spotlight on aspects of lived experience that perhaps other members of the public aren't aware of, perhaps healthcare professionals aren't aware of, and perhaps other people with bleeding disorders aren't aware that other people are also thinking about those experiences too. So I was very lucky to receive some funding from the Centre for Arts and Wellbeing at Brighton University to get this project going. Myself, I was aware of the fantastic work that Local Families with Bleeding Disorders do, and I've been sort of desperate to find a way to work with the group for a long time and bring my world of research professionally together with that kind of world of patient advocacy and bleeding disorders that I'm also really fond of. So I approached Lisa as chair of Local Families when I was sort of thinking about doing this work, and we really sort of co-developed putting it together and making sure that this was something that would be of interest to the community, to the group, but also thinking about how to make it accessible and approachable, what kind of time commitments, thinking of people's care commitments, and making sure that this was something that would be valuable to the community.
Lisa Steadman is chair of Local Families with Bleeding Disorders. I was interested to know what she thought when Rich first approached her about the poetry project.
Straight away, I was really excited about it. I'd attended the online book launch of the Helix of Love, and Richard kindly shared a copy of the book with me. So I'd seen Rich and Dawn online, knew what they were able to do, had read and listened to the poetry from some of the parents at that session, and was really inspired by it to hear that none of them were poets, none of them had experience necessarily in creative writing. It was a relatively short course. It was done online. It all felt like it would be relatively easy for some of our families to find the time to do it. So yeah, I was really excited when we first started talking about it. I was then filled with a little bit of dread because Rich said, "Oh, and you will be taking part yourself, won't you?" I thought, I hadn't thought of that. I thought it was a good idea for everybody else. But I thought, well, got to put your money where your mouth is. If I'm going to be asking other people to do it, then I probably ought to have a go myself. So yeah, and then ended up being really pleased that I did. It was a great experience to do that. I think as well, part of running local families with bleeding disorders as a charity, we put on social events for families to come along and meet each other and support each other. But I think it's really important that we try to look at different ways to support the different members. Not everybody wants to come along to an event. Not everybody can come along to an event. We're called local families. In fact, we have members nationwide. So yeah, I thought it would be an opportunity for people to come together in a different way, in a different space. Most of our events are family events. So actually it was quite nice to have an event where it was just parents and people living with bleeding disorders themselves.
It's interesting to hear Lisa talking about this activity as another way of offering support to people who connect with local families charity. I wondered what she thought the people who participated might take from it.
I think part of it was the opportunity to spend time together. You can't help but as soon as you start to briefly mention your experience, somebody else will say, oh yeah, that happened to us, or something similar happened to us. It's very easy to start the conversation between us. So just spending some time together to sort of listen to each other and support each other and feel like you're with a group of people that do understand. You don't have to do all the explaining and the background. People just know what you're talking about. So I think it was partly that. But I think it was also that opportunity to have a sort of safe space and some dedicated time each week where you were asked to sit and think in whatever way you felt comfortable about how your life was impacted or affected or influenced by the bleeding disorder within your family. Just to be given that opportunity to think about that, I think, it just enables people to see things from a different perspective, or instead of just being in the thick of it all the time and thinking about treatment and hospitals and bleeds and physios and all the other stuff that comes with living with a bleeding disorder. You take a step back and just think about, actually, how do I feel about this? What do I think about this? How is this actually impacting me? And I suspect we don't do a lot of that in day-to-day life. So yeah, I'm hoping that's what people got from it, really, that sense of support and looking at things from a different perspective and having that space to do that.
Dawn, you facilitated the workshops and actually got people not just talking but writing. Were there particular approaches that you use, or particular things that you needed to bear in mind when you were sort of going into work with this group?
Well, with anybody who I work with poetry, my starting point is that anybody can write poetry. Modern poetry, contemporary poetry that doesn't have any sort of complicated rhyming scheme or anything. And I see poetry as poems as a receptacle in which people can put their stuff. If you look at contemporary poetry, that's what's happening. People are putting they're using poems as a way of dealing with their world in whatever shape that is. And so I see myself in this kind of group. I see my role as an enabler. So just encouraging people to begin and have a go. So I was aware that I was working with people who possibly hadn't done any creative writing before. I didn't actually know that virtually nobody had done any creative writing before. So I needed to start off by giving them examples of powerful but really easily accessible poems. So I chose 2 poems per session, which would inspire the participants in 3 ways, really. First of all, to inspire them about content. So I began with really fairly simple poems. One was a list, like a to-do list. What do people need to do? There was another one, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? And working towards more complicated issues. The final poem that we looked at was looking at a health condition that was inherited. The poem that we looked at was about diabetes. So also the poems needed to inspire by, what does a poem look like on the page, a modern poem? How long is it? How long are the lines? What do you do with the words within that? And thirdly, and most importantly, really, it's about the voice. And I was really keen to stress to the participants that they just needed to write it as it is, just speak with their own voice and say whatever they wanted to say, as they would normally say it, if they were having a conversation with a friend or even having a conversation with their innermost self. But I was also really conscious of holding that safe space. And I think with a Zoom, it already feels like a safe space because people are in their home environment. They're not sitting in a room with people that they perhaps don't know very well. They're at home, so they feel safe. And in that first session, I did encourage people, if they wanted, to read out some of the first things that they wrote, only in that first session, just so that there was a sense of everybody sort of having a go and just starting to get things down, just so that nobody felt intimidated, like, oh, people are doing really great stuff. Everybody saw that it was all raw and it was all real and it all felt really real. They were writing 2 poems in an hour, having never written poems before. But that pressure is a fantastic catalyst, actually, in my experience. There's no time to agonize and say, oh, I can't do this. How can I do this? You just got to do it. I say, right, you've got 10 minutes and do something, and it's magical. There is some kind of alchemy, and it's like flicking a switch or pressing a button or something. And honesty and truth in that safe space, and having been given the permission to write, it just feels like giving that permission just lets it out and lets it out onto the page, and in such honest, real ways, and really emotional work. It really made me feel very emotional to read this work.
Alex, Marie, Hannah, Claire and Lisa all participated in the poetry workshops. I was interested in what made them want to take part and how it felt to explore family life with a bleeding disorder through poetry.
I was very much intrigued, but hesitant. I think that something that came to mind when Dawn was talking then is that word permission. So the day-to-day life for all of us is very different to a lot of people, and it's our normal. So we get on with it, we do our best, and we keep going with a smile on our face most of the time. But actually, it's challenging, and being able to express yourself in a certain way, I just felt that I could just, be so truthful and honest and just express how I was feeling. I'm very much able to do that, of course, with my family and friends, but not in this way. So for me as an individual to take part, initially, of course, I was a bit hesitant because then again, you have to be open and honest, and it can be a bit raw. But it's been absolutely, the experience has been absolutely brilliant, and really opened my eyes actually to a different way for me to be able to communicate with myself, actually, which is really powerful. So
Is that something that chimes with the rest of you?
Just that last bit that Alex just said about actually being able to communicate just with yourself in a completely different way, things that perhaps you hadn't thought of, or things that you probably hadn't even maybe admitted to yourself, that brought it out in us. I'm quite a creative person, did art and stuff at college, but never done any creative writing. And I think a lot of us were panicking in the beginning that this was going to be something, we're going to have to develop a whole poem here. But the turning point for me was in the first session when Dawn just said, just write down whatever comes into your head. And that did that, and the pressure of having to create a whole thing just left, and you were just left with your thoughts about whatever particular subject we were talking about at the time. We just get on with things. Is we don't discuss certain things. So it kind of enabled you to dabble into your own self, I suppose. But I actually surprised myself at how much I actually did get out of the sessions. And there was just briefly an event that happened after the sessions had finished. And I actually came home and wrote 2 poems off the back of that. And the powerfulness of getting that out there and on a page was something that I never really expected to experience.
Is it therapeutic to do that?
I think it was. And it sounds crazy just looking back now. At the beginning of that, I would have never have said that, off the back of an experience, I would then decide to put pen to paper. But for whatever reason I did, and it worked. It did work. It felt good afterwards.
Hannah, how did you find that process of writing? Was it something that was a new thing for you?
When Lisa asked me, I was kind of really interested. And it was amazing how quickly stuff just kind of came out and words got on the paper. It just felt like a really small, supportive community. Like, it felt quite safe, and Dawn was really supportive in between the sessions. Yeah, it was amazing how quickly emotions sort of came, and very scary to start with when Dawn said we were going to write 2 poems and read them out in the first session. But it did just kind of flow, and it did feel really therapeutic and also really honest and raw, because I think, we sort of tell our stories to friends and families, but being able to kind of just felt like you could be completely honest on the paper and just say it as it is rather than trying to filter it.
Did you find it became easier? Did it become easier to write?
I actually think it got a little bit harder, because as the sessions went on, I found myself being able to go a bit deeper, and so the emotions came up. So I think it became a little bit emotionally harder. But then what was nice at the end was when we'd actually finished the sessions, I kind of felt inspired to write a more positive poem, because there were some that were kind of about the sadness and the anger and not being listened to, and the passing on the gene. And then at the end I was like, actually, I need to write this other poem that's kind of quite positive about the experience and what it's given us as a family. And then Dawn very kindly helped me with that as well.
You were sharing your poems with each other, presumably really raw, kind of straight off the page as soon as you'd written them. How did that feel?
Actually, there were kind of similarities as we were reading the poems, real similarities actually. So it actually felt really good because other people understood what you're going through. And in normal life, that doesn't tend to happen, especially in my life anyway. We don't have anybody in our family with haemophilia other than my son. So actually to connect with others and to feel that other people kind of got, your life and some of the struggles, it was really kind of empowering, actually.
Is that something that you would have an opportunity to do normally, to speak to other people who did really get where you were coming from?
Yeah, not really. I have attended some of the events before, and I've had those opportunities then, but kind of in my kind of family circles, in my social circles, we don't have anybody with a bleeding disorder. So it's quite hard for other people to understand what we're going through as well. So actually to put that down on paper was really nice. It's kind of something I've thought of doing before, but haven't quite known how to. I've always thought of either writing something or kind of possibly poetry. So when I heard about this, it was just kind of the perfect opportunity to actually go ahead and do that.
What about the rest of you? What was it like to share, sort of to read together and to share your poems, but to hear poems written by the others as well?
I would just say it really resonated with me. We've obviously all, of course, got our own experiences, but it was just like having a group of friends, but a really nice group of friends that understood. And I think, as Hannah said, you don't have to preface it with anything. you can just say it how it is, and everyone will understand. And I think there is so much to be said for that, and that's why, you know, and I'm sure Lisa would agree, that's probably why the community was started in the first place. Of course it was, to bring people together so people don't feel alone in, you know, celebrating the wins, absolutely, but the challenges that come with it. There's lots of different things that, you know, depend on that, from, of course, the care that you're offered, the medicine is provided, your own experiences, you know, family history. There's just so many different, I suppose I kind of vision it's like different aspects, different routes to it. So being able to come and just be honest with somebody, you know, some days are difficult, and it may not been that anything big has happened. It could just be me and my own thoughts worrying about the future, and that hasn't even happened, has it? You know, but it's those feelings that sometimes are difficult to process when you have a child, or you've got a condition yourself, and you're having to work it through.
I think a lot of us talked about, you know, you do try to talk to friends, and again, we've all got very supportive and understanding friends, but you kind of talk about the functional stuff. So, oh, you know, it was a nightmare getting treatment in today, or oh, they've had a bleed, we've had to go out the hospital, oh, we were in A&E for 5 hours yesterday. We don't say, and I feel really awful and I feel really horrible about this, and it's heartbreaking watching my child go through this, and it feels like the end of the world. You know, some people feel perhaps some guilt or some blame for this, given that it's a genetic condition. It's hard to carry all of that and not have people that you can share that with that really kind of understand it. And it's almost like a sort of shortcut when you're talking to people that are living a similar life. You don't have to say, oh, I feel like this because I had to do this, and, you know, the build up. We all know what that bit's like. We were able to kind of get straight to that emotional stuff, and the stuff that we don't often talk about or share, or like Marie said, admit to ourselves or to those around us. You just kind of hold it together and crack on and do what you need to do, and maybe don't even stop to think yourself how you feel about it. So, and this was really all about how you feel, and explaining through poetry to other people what it feels like. You know, we've got great consultants, fantastic nurses, but you don't even really have those conversations with them sometimes. And I'm pretty sure their priorities are, you know, your factor levels and what treatment you're on, and what if the veins are looking okay, and if the port's still working, and all of, again, the functional stuff. Not, so, Mum, Dad, how are you actually feeling today? So I'm hoping that actually, for them, reading some of these poems, not just other families or, you know, people within our communities that don't have bleeding disorders, will see that different perspective on, this is the lived experience. It's not just about getting an injection in every other day, or making sure you're sterile before you do a port injection and all that kind of stuff. You know, it is about feelings as well.
How are you going to get that out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're in the really exciting stage at the moment of finalizing the sort of full collection of all of the poems that were written, and there's I think nearly 50 poems that we've selected to include in the full book, which is I think tentatively called Bleeding and Belonging. And that will be transformed into a digital collection, and we'll be sort of distributing that and making it freely available online for anyone to sort of read and share, and really just, you know, making it accessible so that people can spend time reading and sitting with these narratives. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful resource for people that are perhaps new to the bleeding disorders community, to find out that, you know, there are other people who are thinking these thoughts, feeling these experiences, but also, yeah, sharing them with healthcare professionals to sort of really shine a light on those experiences that are for no fault of anyone's, often just absent, and maybe this is an opportunity to start some new conversations. And I think, you know, as a group, we're probably all really keen to see these stories, these poems circulate and have impact and stay with people, really remain memorable, and maybe prompt people to think differently about bleeding disorders and bleeding disorders care. And really happy to sort of have conversations with anyone in the wider community who are interested in sort of finding ways to make this travel even further.
I think that's really interesting, because I know you're going to read some poems in a minute, and I've had a sneak peek at some of them. But I've seen something that I think is really emotive, and if we're not as healthcare professionals asking the right questions, then we need to, because actually, if you guys are not looking after yourselves and all your children, then we're doing it wrong, aren't we?
Well, and we know in the world of bleeding disorder care, how many years have we been talking about the lack of psychosocial support? There just isn't a lot of psychological support available to us or our children with bleeding disorders or their siblings. It just isn't really there, and it's just crucial that people are given that opportunity to talk about how they're feeling and how they're coping and how they're managing. And it was lovely that we found this way to do that. There should be other ways, but this has been a really, really beautiful way to do that, and highlight just how important it is that people have the opportunity to talk about how they feel about it. I'd just like to thank everyone for being so up for doing this, for Rich for bringing the idea to us, for Dawn for sharing her expertise, and for the members for being brave enough, because I think some of us had met at maybe an event or two, but we certainly weren't a group of mates that were coming together that already had long friendships and knew that we would be able to share with each other. So it was brave to become part of the group. It was brave. I think everybody here has admitted that they'd never written poetry before. They were a little bit fearful, a little bit full of sort of trepidation about it. For what we've produced, you would never know that what we've produced came from that group of people. We've come up with some really great stuff, and I'm really, really proud of everyone that took part. I'm proud that Local Families is there to enable those opportunities to bring people together.
I'd love to respond to that, Lisa, that I was just so thrilled with the poems that people wrote. And it really does back up my sense that, in a way, the less people know about poetry, the better poetry they write. I know that sounds really strange, but people who come to poetry with loads of preconceptions are held back by those preconceptions. But if you know very little, you can just do it and be free to do it. And honestly, hand on heart, the poetry that this group wrote would stand shoulder to shoulder with any very experienced poet's work. They were absolutely amazing pieces that they wrote. And it's been such a privilege to work with everybody.
Dawn's right. The group really did produce some amazing poems, two of which you'll hear next. They're emotive and give real insight into life as the parent of a child with a bleeding disorder. The first poem is by Hannah and the second by Alex.
So this was the last poem I wrote, which was on the more positive side, and it's called What They Didn't Tell Me. At 8 months, we finally had a diagnosis, severe haemophilia type A. They told me of a life of needles, hospitals, and unpredictability, thrown into a world of infusions, blood tests, and fear. What they didn't tell me about was the deep bond we would have, the ongoing trust we would develop, the deep emotional chats we would navigate, that you would make me laugh every single day, that you would be the world's best cuddler, that you would love with all your heart and smile with all your soul. They didn't tell me that you would love animals and hate cake, that my family would become this awesome, cool team. They didn't tell me that we would meet strangers we now call friends, and that people in uniform would sometimes feel like family. That you would find your sweet little way, but it would all be okay, but it would all be okay, but it would all be okay.
This one is, I've chosen words for mum. Another word for mum is watcher. I draw quietly from a well of fear 12 times before breakfast. I count the hours by what might go wrong, by how long since he last fell, how loud the silence after a crash. Theo doesn't know this. His joy is still untethered. He runs like the world is made of cushions, like nothing under his skin could betray him. But I know his blood forgets its work. I know the names of bruises before they bloom. I know the cold clarity of Hemlibra vials and gauze, and how to smile while pressing a cotton ball against what wants to spill. Another word for child is Theo. He asks if he can climb the hill, if he can jump. My yes is always shaped like a no, coated in caution. There are days he wakes full of fire, and I must become a rain, gentle enough not to put him out. I make bargains in silence. Just let today be soft. Just let him come back with all his blood still inside him. Another word for love is stillness. Another is teaching, showing him not to be afraid while holding enough fear for us both. Sometimes I am both cradle and shield. Sometimes I am the ground he lands on when he forgets. And at night, when he's dreaming, I press my ear to the door and name the silence safe. Another word for mother is release, and I'm the one who learns to let him go a little each day, even as everything in her reaches out to hold him.
I don't think the group will mind me mentioning that tears were shed when we recorded those poetry readings. I wondered what it was like to hear poems being read hot off the page during the poetry workshops.
Yeah, I think it felt less lonely, you know. I think because some of the thoughts and feelings that we have are quite dark, and quite scary and quite huge and quite overwhelming. And, you know, even in my own little family, we protect each other from that, you know. For example, with my husband and stuff, we're each other's rock sometimes, so we don't always spill out that stuff. So to kind of hear other people talk about that stuff makes you definitely feel less, well, it made me feel less lonely. But it also made me feel really heard as well, like just getting them on the paper, like seen and heard properly and understood, I think.
It's just so nice to kind of hear that other people are going through kind of similar things and that actually you're not alone.
It's hard, isn't it? Because you don't wish your experiences on any other people. You don't want to find there's a whole bunch of people out there that are dealing with the same horrible situations. But at the same time, there's almost a sort of sense of relief that you found your people and that you aren't alone with it. And you can just say a bit of it and the rest, it's understood. You know, you don't have to explain every last detail for somebody to understand how you might be feeling about that.
I think even when you do explain every detail to other people, they still just, they can't grasp it. And unless you live it, they just, they can't understand.
Hopefully other members of the charity, when they read it too, even if they don't come to the events or they don't particularly engage with the Facebook group and ask questions, perhaps this is going to be their thing that makes them feel that they are part of a community and they are supported and they are understood. This just might be a way in for them to sit quietly on their own and read the poems and think, I understand that, I hear that, I feel that.
I think there is a universality about the poems too. I mean, I'm not part of the bleeding disorders community myself, but I wept a lot when I was working with people one-to-one with these poems, and they really reached me as a mother, as a grandmother now. You know, there's something about the human spirit in these poems that potentially could reach far beyond the bleeding disorders community, actually. You know, to other people who are perhaps dealing with, you know, other conditions within their families. That sense of dealing with things emotionally, not just dealing with things on a practical level. I think it definitely comes through in the poems. They're so powerful.
As Dawn says, the poems written during the project really are powerful, and they will be available in digital format for everyone to read soon. A huge thank you to Rich, Dawn, Lisa, Hannah, Alex, Claire and Marie, and a heartfelt well done to everyone from local families with bleeding disorders who took part in the poetry project. If your family is affected by a bleeding disorder and you'd like to connect with the local families group, you can find details of their website in the information for this episode. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Haemcast. Thank you for listening and join us again soon.